Welcome to class. First thing I'm going to do, as usual, is share the class notes. Here they are, just so we can see where we are. Okay, so here it is, Thursday the 19th. We're going to take a look at the Bill of Rights in class today, talk about it a little bit. And then what's different about this essay is that you need two outside sources in addition to the Bill of Rights itself. I'll give you the citation for the Bill of Rights, but you need to add two sources. Remember, for the last essay, you only had one source. And then this first draft is going to be due next Tuesday, the 24th. It's only 5 days. I realize it's short. But again, those of you who finish on the weekend, finish early, whatever, certainly you can send it in as soon as it's ready. And I will, as always, try and get back to you that day or the next day. And just remember, if you've sent me something and 2 days go by and you haven't heard from me, definitely let me know, because that means I either misplaced it or thought I sent it back to you and didn't. That happens also sometimes. So here we are today. Monday, we will not have a class. You'll still be writing that essay number 2, but we will have a class on Tuesday. And it says reading in class, but I guess we're going to read a little bit. We have some reading to do in preparation for the third essay. So we'll do some of that work on Tuesday, the 24th. Let's just stop for 1 second and take a look at the curriculum itself and see what we have in store a little further down the line. Okay, here it is. All right, so let's share that. That's going to be this one here. Okay, so now I got the curriculum up here, and I'm just going to scroll down a little bit to see what happens, to show you what happens at the end of the term. All right, so here we are, January 19th. Next week, we're going to start to take a look at essay number 3, because by February 7th, we're already looking at the final exam, just so you know. And that first draft of the final exam is going to, which is just a final essay, is going to be due on February 14th. That's why we have, that's why we're going to start to look at essay number 3 around the 24th, so that you have enough time to do all of those essays. I realize the schedule is very tight, but as you know, I'm very lenient about the time frames. So if you can get those essays in sooner, okay. If you need a little bit extra time, that's all right. Oh, as well, there's a little bit of play in there. So let me just stop there for a second and see if anybody has any questions about where we are.
If we hand in the essay like a couple of days late, would points be deducted?
No. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 students, a couple of them are in class now, who have not yet handed in that first draft of that first essay. So please, you know who you are, please do that. So, because you can't fall too far behind. But for your question, no, if you're late a day or two, it's okay. Really, we have the period of time till class ends to sort of be loose about. So if you need a little extra time, that's great. But if everybody takes a little bit extra time, that will be a problem. So let's see how that goes. All right, hopefully I answered your question. Anybody else have anything they're not sure about? Okay, so then let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be doing for essay number 2. All right, so what happened was that when the United States issued the Declaration of Independence, they began a war with Great Britain. England was the most powerful country in the world at the time, and the United States was basically nothing. And somehow, through their courage and their perseverance, the people who revolted and rebelled against England actually defeated England in that war and earned their independence. Surprise to everybody, I'm sure surprise to them as well. And at that point, they said they were going to have their own country, but they had no idea how that country was going to be designed or how they were going to put together a government and how it would operate or anything like that. I mean, they had ideas because people had written about these things, but nobody ever put this into practice. They had a lot of theory, like the inalienable rights theory, but they didn't have much practical experience, any practical experience, in fact. In fact, no one in the world ever had any practical experience creating a government where the power was in the hands of the citizens and not the leaders. Every other country up until that time was ruled from the top down. And what the theory of democracy is that somehow the citizens will be the ones who determine the fate of the country. Now, what they decided to do was to create what's called a democratic republic, not actually a democracy. That word democracy is a Greek word, and it means mob rule. It means mob rule. You might even think of it as majority rule. But as many of you know, the majority isn't always fair to a minority. And so to protect minorities of all kinds of types, the people who established the government of the United States, we call them the founding fathers, they decided to protect the rights of the minorities and not let the majority rule. So they created what we call a republic. A republic is a representative democracy. They knew that the tyranny of the majority was just as bad as the tyranny of the king. Remember, in the Declaration of Independence, they were fighting against tyranny, the tyranny of the English king, and they wanted to make sure that the government they would establish in the United States would not be tyrannical as well. They didn't want to replace one tyranny with another tyranny. And the tyranny of the majority is a term we give when the minority, whoever the minority may be, it could be a religious minority, it could be an ethnic minority, it could be a racial minority, it could be a monetary minority, whatever minority it might be, minority interests, minority views. When the majority rules, the minority doesn't have any rights at all. And that's what they wanted to avoid. So they created, long story short, they created a US Constitution that protects minority rights against the tyranny of the majority. They created a constitution that limited the power of the government. Because obviously when the king was ruling and controlling the government, through the king, through the government, was able to implement his will among all the people. So they wanted to create a government that was limited in power, which is rather tricky thing to do. For example, some of the colonies that turned into states were larger, like Pennsylvania and New York, and some of the states were smaller, like Rhode Island and Connecticut and Maryland and Delaware. And obviously the bigger states had more room and more people than the littler states. So if you simply went by the majority, those bigger states would have more of a say and could control what happened in the littler states. And that's the kind of thing they was trying to avoid, just an example. So they created a government that was structured in a way to limit the power of the government and to protect minority rights. So first of all, one of the things they did is they divided the power of the government into three branches, into three pieces. And by dividing the power in that way, rather than having all the power in the hands of the king, for example, they would limit the government's ability to operate unilaterally. All three branches of the government, all three pieces of the government would have to agree before anything could be done. And so they created, first of all, what we call the Congress, which is the legislative branch. And what the legislative branch of the government does is it creates the laws. That's all they do. That's all Congress does, is create law. They divided the Congress into two pieces, into a Senate, where every state gets 2 senators, and a House of Representatives, which was based on population. That's the way they dealt with the fact that some of the states were big and some of the states were little. If every state had 2 senators, then every state was equal in their representation in the Senate, which was fair. And if the House of Representatives is based on population, then when there are more people somewhere, those more people would have more say over what happened, and that's also fair. So that's sort of the compromise that they created in order to limit the power of the government and in order to protect the minority rights, the rights of the smaller states in this case. So Congress was the legislative branch. Congress creates the law. And then there's the executive branch, which enforces the law. Takes to execute means to take action. You might think execute means to kill somebody, but really execute means to take action. And so all of the departments of the government that actually carry out the law, that enforce the law, that put the law into practice, report to the president. But the president doesn't make the law. Yes, the president has a role in making the law. The president has the opportunity to agree with Congress, but Congress can make law without the president. They can override any objection, which we call a veto, any objection that the president has. If enough of them get together, they can create law, even if the president doesn't want it to be the law. And then the president is charged with the responsibility in all the departments, military and civilian, Department of Education, Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation, all of those departments that actually do stuff, that they report to the president in the executive branch. And then what the founders did is they created that third branch, which is the Supreme Court. And the role of the Supreme Court is to make sure that any laws that are created by Congress and that are agreed to by the president, they make sure that those laws are actually in accordance with what the Constitution says. The Constitution is designed to protect the minorities. The Constitution is designed to limit the power of the government, and it's the Supreme Court's role to make sure that any laws that are passed do those things, protect people's rights and limit the power of the government as the Constitution says. So this is the way that they worked out in order to protect the rights of the people and have a representative government, and they structured the government in this way. Then they realized that in this document, the Constitution that they created, they forgot to talk about the rights of the people. So they amended the Constitution with 10 amendments, the first 10 amendments. These days, there are many more than 10. Constitution has been amended a number of times since then. But right away at the beginning, they included the first 10 amendments. And these first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. And they delineate mostly the rights of the people and also some other limitations on the government's ability to rule over the people. So the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution. Here I have given you, and so you'll get it in the notes. Here's a citation you can use for the Bill of Rights. And of course, you can use that website there if you want in order to get some more information. You can put whatever date you access it on there. I just have that date there. And the person who chiefly authored the Bill of Rights was James Madison, who also wound up being, I think, our fifth president. Yeah. So sometimes the Bill of Rights is listed under James Madison as the author, and you could refer to James Madison as the author. He was from Virginia, and Virginia had, the state of Virginia also had a Bill of Rights. And so that's what James Madison drew on mostly with the Bill of Rights here. So here's a little, I'm not going to read this part with you. I just put in the notes some more background so you can get a sense of what happened. And I'll leave that in the class notes. But let's take a look exactly at the Bill of Rights itself, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And the first one, and so they're called amendments. And as you can see, the word amendment, when it's referred to one of these, it's naming it. So you would capitalize it like that. And Congress also would work, and the word Constitution, those are words that you would capitalize because they refer to specific entities. But let's look at this one. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So here you see the limitation. Congress can't make any laws. That's what it's saying. No law can make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Well, what does that mean? The established religion at the time was the religion of the king of the country. So the king of England was Anglican. So the established religion in England was the Anglican religion. The king of Spain or the queen of Spain was Catholic. So the established religion in Spain was Catholicism. The king of France was Catholic, and so on. And so when the king had an established religion, that means they persecuted the people and discriminated against the people who didn't practice that particular religion. And that's not what people in the United States wanted. Many of the people who had come to the colonies were running away from the religious wars that were occurring in Europe at the time. From about 1500 to about 1750, there were religious wars in all of Europe between the Catholics and the Protestants. Now, I know they're all Christians, but they were fighting amongst each other. And so people who were Protestant in France were persecuted by the Catholics. France, they came to Canada. People from all over Europe who were in the minority, who practiced the minority religion that wasn't the religion of the established religion of the king or the prince or whoever it was, they ran away to colonies in the United States. So in the United States, you had many different religions represented. And the first thing that the founding fathers wanted to make sure of was that there would not be any established religion for the nation. And so they put this right in there as the first limitation on the government. So Congress cannot establish any religion. And then Congress shall make, so all this Congress shall make no law governs over the entire First Amendment. Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof, meaning prohibiting the free exercise of religion. We call this freedom of religion. So Congress can't limit the government can't limit anybody's ability to practice the religion that they want to practice and the way they want to practice it. It says free exercise. Practice religion any way you want. So the first two these are really two different things here. This is what we call Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. We call that separation of church and state. Church representing being symbolic of religion and state being symbolic of government. So this is a separation of church and state. Government has no business establishing laws that have anything to do with religion. And then we call this one freedom of religion, meaning that people can practice whatever religion they want and the government can't pass any laws preventing them from doing that. Nor can Congress pass any laws abridging the freedom of speech. Just looking to see if I have notes down there. Yes, I do. Okay, so, and that's probably something you're all fairly familiar with, but speech is speaking. The Supreme Court over time has ruled that freedom of speech really should be considered as freedom of expression. So art forms, music, any kind of way that an individual would express his or her ideas or thoughts, the Congress can't pass laws to limit that. So this is the reason, for example, we have pornography is legal, because it used to be limited. People sued, they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled no, pornography is just another form of expression, and therefore the government can't ban it. They can't say you can't have that, just as an example. And the next part was here, Congress shall make no law abridging. To abridge means to limit. To abridge means to limit. So Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of the press. The press here meant at the time newspapers and books, but of course these days there's many different ways to publish things. But definitely the idea of information being able to be in the hands of the people was an important idea. Thomas Jefferson, for example, thought that you had to have an educated public. Thomas Jefferson was our second president. You had to have an educated public in order for the public to be able to vote, in order for them to be able to vote in a knowledgeable way. And one of the ways people found out about things was through the press, through the news. So the government cannot limit the ability of news people to publish information and to gain access. That's why, for example, at certain functions, you have a press box, right? And the press is the news people are always there, and then they get special treatment. They can be there, or they can have a press conference with the United States president, for example. Maybe you've seen that on TV, and it's reporters are there. I'm not allowed in, you're not allowed in. The government can say that, but they can't limit the access of the news people from the government. So they can be there having those press conferences. And the next here, Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to peaceably assemble. That's very important, because assembly you might think this is protesting, but it's not just protesting. It's not just assembling, meaning getting together. So here, if you want to have a bridge club, the government can't say no. You want to have a parents organization, the government can't say no. You want to start a business with some other people, the government can't say no. You want to have a nonprofit corporation that does whatever, then the government can't say no. So the government can't stop people from getting together amongst themselves and doing whatever they want to do. Of course, under the king could limit what people were able to do. So they have this idea of assembly, meaning people can get together. And certainly people can go out in the street and protest. I know you're very familiar with that, but you'll notice it's peaceably, not violently. So as soon as violence is around, then the government can do something. It's only when people are peaceful that they have the right to protest. And then lastly, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. To petition means to ask, and a grievance is a complaint, and redress means to address the complaint, to solve it, to deal with it in some way. This means that people can ask the government to stop doing something or to start doing something, and the government can't punish the people who are asking for that. Okay, I just need to take a short break, so hang on for a minute, and I will Okay, I'm back. Sorry. Thank you very much. Okay, so here we have what we call the First Amendment. And you can see that in the First Amendment, there are all of these particular rights right there. So for this essay, you need to write about 3 of these rights. We're going to go through the whole 10 amendments. You can choose from the other amendments as well. Other rights are enumerated or listed in the other amendments. You might be more interested in writing about those rights. But if you wanted to, you could simply write your essay about freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press, for example. Any 3. I say 3, of course, because you are looking for that 5-paragraph essay. With a 5-paragraph essay, you get to the 500 or 600 words really easily. So you could basically, you could stop right there and say, I'm going to write my essay about these 3 things, and that's it. Remember, you need 2 outside sources in addition to the Bill of Rights itself. But let's go through the other amendments, because some of you might be more interested in writing about some of the other rights that are listed there. For example, Amendment 2, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Infringed means to limit. A militia, by the way, is a citizen army, and it, of course, was a citizen army, people with their own guns, who fought against the British and created the United States in the first place. So here, and the founder fathers, even though they just defeated England, they were very worried about England coming back and trying to regain the colonies. I mean, just because you won one war doesn't mean 10 years later there won't be another war, which of course kept happening in Europe quite frequently. And in fact, this was right. This document here, this Constitution is being written in 1789. And in 1812, which was basically 22 years later, England attacked the United States again, trying to recapture the colonies, the War of 1812. So their concern about people needing to have weapons in order to fight the British if the British came back, or if France decided to try to take over the colonies, or Spain or some other place, they wanted to make sure that the people had guns so that they could immediately fight anybody who would try to invade the country. So militia is a citizen army. The Supreme Court, over a period of time, has ruled that, well, a militia really means the National Guard. Maybe some of you have heard of the National Guard. National Guard is composed of citizens, people like you and I, who sign up for a military organization in each state. The National Guard is run by the states, and you train as a soldier and you have weapons. National Guard is also called out sometimes in times of emergency, but they can certainly be called out to fight a war. Sometime in the past, the National Guard has been, at different states, has been called to go overseas and fight in a war that the United States was in, like in Vietnam. So it's a valid idea that the militia is a citizen army, and the courts have ruled that, and that's what has allowed some people to say, well, maybe we can take the guns away from the people. Now, I understand taking guns away from people is probably a good thing in many circumstances. On the other hand, the Constitution says you can't do it. You can't limit the ability of people to keep and bear arms. When it says arms here, it means weapons, and these days the weapons are mostly guns. And so there was a real sound reason for this. Another sound reason for this is that the government is something that the founding fathers were trying to limit the power of. And in countries like Europe, where the citizens are not allowed to have guns, the government is the only one with weapons. And if the government decides to do something and the people don't like it and they can't stop the government from doing it, they have no recourse they're at the mercy of the government. So one of the things that happens here, the security of a free state, is that if the citizens have weapons, then not just the government, then the citizens can defend themselves against the government. Remember, these people were very, very concerned about government tyranny. For thousands of years, people had lived all over the world under the tyranny of governments, kings, princes, emperors, warlords, whoever it might be. And here they were trying to create a new type of country where the citizens, the people living there, were not at the mercy of the government. And so they wanted to limit the power of the government in all these different ways. Here in the First Amendment, they're limiting the power of the government in terms of these functions: religion, speech, press, petition, assembly. And here in Amendment 2, they're limiting the power of the government by saying people have the right to have weapons to defend themselves. Security of a free state. That term doesn't just mean people from France invading. It also means the government trying to take over and act in ways that's not allowed. So very controversial here. This is all about gun control. Everybody has different opinions about how and why and when guns should be limited and where and whether they should be legal, whatever. So if you want to write about gun control and guns, and you may have more experience with this, more interest in this, by all means. That's what Amendment 2 is all about. It's a very short amendment, and it's very clearly stated. You can see it right there. That's why the Supreme Court has talked about a militia being the National Guard, because that allows the government to have a little more leeway in terms of private citizens and having weapons, because the Supreme Court ruled that, oh, well, private citizens have weapons when they're part of a well-regulated militia, not on their own. So you can see how this part of the amendment speaks against a little bit this part of the amendment. A little tension there, and that's one of the reasons we can do gun control. Okay, so here comes Amendment 3. This is also a very specific amendment, and that's because because the king was doing this, and so it was one of the things they wanted to stop the king from doing, or any government. No soldier shall in the time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in the manner to be prescribed by law. When the King of England brought his soldiers to fight the colonists, the soldiers were housed in the colonists' homes, and they would sleep in the colonists' bed and eat the colonists' food. And of course, nobody wants that. You don't want soldiers in your house sleeping in your bed, eating your food. So that's basically what this amendment was there for, to stop that from happening. It was one of the terrible things that happened to the colonists during the time of the Revolution. And then you have Amendment 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. This is the closest thing to a right to privacy that we have in the Constitution. People need to be secure, their persons, their effects, their property, against unreasonable searches and seizures. In other words, the government can't just come in and take things. The king used to do that. The king would say, okay, we're going to go into your house and take whatever we want. So once again, this was an attempt to limit the government power. Oh, sorry, that keeps happening to me. Okay. It says, and no warrants shall issue. A warrant is a legal document that says the government can seize persons, houses, papers, effects. But in order to have a warrant, you need what the Constitution calls probable cause. So the government can't just decide that they want to arrest somebody. They have to have a reason, a probable cause to arrest somebody or seize their property or whatever they may want to search their property, whatever it may be. Probable cause has to be supported by oath or affirmations. A witness has to say, for example, there's drugs in that house. And then the government can get a warrant and go into the house and see if there are drugs there. They can't just willy-nilly go into people's houses looking for drugs, for example, or anything else. And that warrant needs to particularly describe the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So even if they go into your house looking for drugs, because somebody said they saw drugs in your house, and they see, let's say, a gun, and they can't take that gun or any other papers you might have around, because unless that was listed in the warrant. The warrant says they're looking for drugs, the only thing they can do is take out drugs. If they wanted to take that gun or those papers out, they'd have to go back to the judge and get another warrant that would describe the papers or the gun, and then they could come back and try to take those things. So this is a huge limitation on the power of the government to come into people's homes and take their things and arrest people. And that's what the king was able to do all the time. This is a very important amendment in terms of protecting the rights of the people against government power. Right? Warrants are only issued by a court, and the government's divided up into three parts. So the executive branch has to go to the judicial branch and present information that would convince the judicial branch, a judge, to issue the warrant, to say, yes, you can go into the house and look for drugs. So that makes the government work, that makes the pieces of the government have to work together in order to exercise its powers. You can see how that division of powers in the government helps to limit what the government can do. There's steps, there's processes, there's things they have to go through in order to take the actions that they might want to take. And then there's Amendment 5. You can see some of these amendments are longer and have several parts to them. So remember earlier I said you could take that First Amendment and do freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and just write your essay about that. You could take any one of these amendments, and you could see there's several parts in there. You could write about just that amendment and different parts in that amendment, or you could write about some part from Amendment 1, freedom of speech, and some part from Amendment 4, right to privacy, and some part from Amendment 5, and those could be the things that you focus on. So unlike the other essay, here I'm giving you a lot of freedom as to what to choose to write about. So choose something you're interested in, something that interests you in some way, because remember, you're going to need to have at least 2 outside sources to help you with this essay. You have to do a little research and a little reading. It's always better to have a little interest in what you're researching. Here it is. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime. A capital crime, by the way, is a crime that's punishable by the death penalty. That's a capital crime. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on the presentment or indictment of a grand jury. Grand jury. You may know about a grand jury. Probably you do know about juries, a jury trial, where you have 12 people, sometimes 6, usually 12 people deciding on the guilt or innocence of a person. Grand jury is a little different. Grand jury is 25 or 30 people, and the only one who gets to present evidence in a grand jury is the prosecutor. There's no defense. There's no defendant. Right? It's just a process that the prosecutor has to go through in order to arrest somebody. And there's no defendant's not there, and there's no defense. So it's just the prosecutor presenting that information. And the prosecutor has to convince the majority of that, it's grand because it's large, the majority of that 25 or 30 people that in fact a crime has been committed and this particular person could well have committed that crime. There's enough evidence, except for the militia, right? Except for the army. The army has its own rules. Some of you might have been in the army, or if you don't know, they have their own code of military conduct and their own laws. And so the naval forces and the army and the Marines, they all operate in a totally different way. When you're a soldier or Marine, you don't have these rights that are listed here. Okay, then it says, nor shall a person be subject for the same offense to be put twice in jeopardy of life or limb. This is what we call double jeopardy. This means that if the government arrests you for, let's say, stealing pencils from somebody, and they take you to trial, and the jury says, no, you didn't steal them, you're innocent, they can't the next day arrest you for that same crime and try you again. Of course, the king could do that. So this means that if you're found innocent of anything, they can't retry you for that same crime. Of course, the Supreme Court has ruled if new evidence comes in, then they could do that. So, but the idea is basically that you're safe. Once you've been considered innocent of a crime, of a particular crime, you can't be charged with that particular crime again. Nor shall anyone be compelled to be a witness against himself. So here you have the idea that people don't need to speak to the police if they're arrested, because they can remain silent. You may have heard that. The Miranda rights, which come from the Supreme Court interpreting this amendment, and one of those rights is that you have the right to remain silent. So this also means that you can't be tortured. The king, of course, used to use torture, and in a lot of places around the world, they still do use torture in order to get people to confess, in order to get people to say, I did it, because it's easier to say I did it than it is to feel the pain of torture. So this is also a prohibition against torturing people in order to get a confession out of them. Nor can anybody be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Due process means the particular procedures that the police, for example, have to follow when they're going to arrest somebody or take their property or lock them up or kill them. They need to go through the proper steps. Those are delineated clearly. So if a chokehold is not allowed against a perpetrator by the police, and the police use a chokehold, by then they're not following due process of law. So all kinds of rules about how the police can operate, for example, and any other government agency, the IRS, anybody, and but usually when it's the law, it's somehow the police or the FBI or something like that. And so they must follow the due process of the law. If they don't do it in the proper way, then it can be thrown out of court, because they must follow that order. Those processes of law are the things that provide for our freedom. I talked a lot about that right to liberty in the Declaration of Independence, and I talked about how liberty is freedom under the law. And here is the law that we're talking about, the particular processes that different legal entities have created. And that's what gives the freedom to everybody. If the government were able not to follow the law, then we wouldn't be free, because the government could do whatever they wanted to do. So the government has to follow the law. Everybody's subject to the same law. No one is above the law, the same law for all. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So again, if the government's going to take anything from you, they need to pay you for it. They need to compensate you for it. I know there's a few of these, just bear with me. I know they're a little complex, but you'll be interested in some of these things. Here, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. The government can't throw you in jail and keep you there forever. They need to bring you to trial, speedy, and that trial has to be public. People need to be able to witness that trial. Can't have secret trials. In communist Russia, they used to have secret trials all the time. In some other countries around the world, they surely have secret trials, or they surely imprison people for lengths of time, not speedy, and that's how they stop people from doing things. That there has to be an impartial jury. That's that 12-person jury, and not people who are against the accused in some way, but impartial. They have to have an open mind about whether the accused person is guilty or innocent. And it needs to be local in the state or district where the crime was committed. You can't just take somebody and move them across the country and try them there unless circumstances really warrant that for some reason. person accused has the right to confront the witnesses. In other words, you can't have secret witnesses. The witnesses have to come to court and be cross-examined by the defense. All right. And here, the accused has to have a compulsory process to obtain witness, the accused's own witnesses. That means that if you're accused of a crime and you know that somebody knows something about the crime and you want that person in court, you can have a warrant issued to bring that person to court, and the person will have to come and testify. So the government has that power and the defendant has that power. And of course, those powers are exercised by lawyers. So you have the right, people have the right to the assistance of counsel for defense. If you can't afford one, one will be appointed for you, right? That's where this comes from. The government has to ensure that anybody accused of a crime has proper legal defense. That's due process. If a person, if they prosecute a person and they don't provide for their defense, that prosecution can be thrown out. So there's a lot of different things in this one about criminal law, the Miranda rights, the right to remain silent. Oh, that's up here. And the right to have a lawyer and things of that nature. So again, this amendment is chock full of things of importance. Here's Amendment 7. Basically, very, very clear, very limited amendment, which says that if there's a civil case and it's more than $20, these days, of course, it's more than that, then the right of a trial, you can have a trial by jury. This has to do with small claims. You might know about small claims court. Maybe some of you have been to small claims court. I don't know what the limit is these days. It's different by states. But in small claims court, it's not a jury trial any longer. The judge is there and the judge just hears from the two people who are arguing about the money, and the judge makes a determination based on what the judge hears from the two people. There's no right to a jury trial in small claims court. And you can see that's a very practical way of dealing with small claims. Of course, they started with $20, so it's really small claims. Of course, $20 was worth a lot more in 1789 than it is today. Here's Amendment 8, also very straightforward and very clear. Excessive bail should not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So first of all, here, excessive bail. You know, maybe you've heard about this modern movement, this current movement to eliminate cash bail. People commit crimes, and it happens in many states now, in many jurisdictions, where people are not being held in jail because they don't have the money to let themselves out. So this is one of the bases, being able to do that kind of thing. And you say any monetary bail is excessive, but in the Constitution, it says excessive bail. So there's a debate. Also, you can't fine somebody too much for a crime, nor cruel and unusual punishment. Here is the argument against the death penalty. The people who managed to get rid of the death penalty in many places around the country claimed that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment. And the Supreme Court agreed, and so the death penalty was banned in many, many cases. These days, there are exceptions to that. There's always exceptions. But basically, the argument for eliminating the death penalty, say for stealing a horse, which that's what it used to be, was deemed to be cruel and unusual punishment, and therefore you couldn't do that any longer. Here's Amendment 9, just two more. Here's Amendment 9, again, very short, very clear, and very important. The enumeration, meaning listing, the enumeration in the Constitution, this document here, of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. This simply means that this Bill of Rights does not list all the rights that people have. People have other rights retained by the people of the nation. We can't list every single right that people have. So just because it's not listed here doesn't mean it's not a right retained by the people. Think of the abortion debate. Many people want believe that there's a right to an abortion. But it's other people say, but it's not in the Constitution. Well, this amendment sort of contradicts that notion that it's not in the Constitution, because it says right here that just because it's not listed here doesn't mean it's not a right by the people. And of course, the debate has to be what that particular right is. So the people who wrote the Constitution realized that they're not God, and they can't foresee every possibility, and they can't list every single right that people have. They listed the most important ones they could think of, and certainly the ones where the King of England and others were abusing people and taking advantage of people, and where the government was exercising its power in ways that was damaging to the people. But they made sure to put this amendment in here so that everybody knew that there are other rights. If people claim rights, and if they want to pass laws and say there's a right to whatever it is, the people have the right to do that. And then lastly, same kind of amendment, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved for the states or for the people. In other words, if it's not listed in the Constitution as a power of the federal government, then it is a power of the state government or of the people in general. So if the people want to have a right to abortion and the people all vote for a right to abortion, for example, then there can be established a right for abortion. Or if a state wants to say, in this state, there's a right to an abortion, I'm just using abortion as an example, then the state can do that, because the United States Constitution doesn't speak to that issue, doesn't speak to abortion, for example. So there you have the 10 amendments of the Constitution. Remember, your goal is to choose any 3 of them, any 3 amendments, any 3 rights listed in any of the amendments, any 3 parts of any of the amendments, and craft your essay about those. So think about what you think are the most important ones, and I would say, and choose to write about those. Okay, questions? Anybody? Not sure what to do? Need more instruction? Complaints? It's too easy. It's too hard. All right, there's a lot in there. I'll send you the notes. You can certainly do some research to find out more about any of those rights, any of those amendments that are listed there. But your assignment, get to writing your essays. Okay? That's it for today.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Have a good weekend, everybody.